looking to change your destiny in life? Be your own boss? Start your own business? If you are, you need people who understand your needs and are committed to helping you make it happen. At DKP & Co Chartered Accountants, we are more than just accountants. We are business advisors, taxation consultants, and strategists that specialise in setting up businesses. We understand the client and give them the very best customised advice and strategies to achieve their goals. Visit our website, dkpco.com.au, or give us a call today on 03 9023 9370. Fast, proactive, personal. That's DKP & Co Chartered Accountants.
Buying your electricity from the big energy companies is now the most expensive way to power your home. In fact, the average electricity bill in Australia has more than doubled in the last 15 years. But not for the ones who went solar. Unlike your electricity bill, the price of solar has actually come down.
Welcome here to Nick and Ante's Serie Spectacular, Episode 3 here on FNR Football Nation Radio. Apologies for the delay. We've had some technical problems here in the studio, a bit of teething issues getting back in. Big morning, massive morning after what happened over in Belfast. We'll start off with all of that, but before we get to Italy's goalless draw with Northern Ireland and all the permutations, everything else, Ante, welcome to Episode 3.
Buongiorno a tutti. How are you all?
Not good, Ante. Not gonna lie. It's deja vu. It's deja vu. It literally is.
I mean, look, I'm basically indestructible after Croatia qualified yesterday morning, but I mean, it was this window has been so weird for Italy. I mean, there is clearly an idea and an identity, but the reality is that it doesn't happen. And let's say without Marco Verratti, like if he's killing a a pack, if he's a packet a day smoker and he's going to be injured half the time, then he can be as good as he likes. But if he's got to be on the pitch. I don't know then as a consequence how it all happens without him, and that was kind of evident at the Euro as well. I think back to the Turkey game and how it all panned out in that game and how filtered they were down one side without Verratti, and then the necessity for Barella to receive the ball in certain areas, and that was how the goal came in that first game against Turkey. Like it was a transition, receive the ball as a third man, and then Italy were able to penetrate from there. I mean, it's really tricky. But even this morning against Northern Ireland, that they didn't really pull them in any certain way defensively. They became susceptible on the counter as a consequence, much like the Switzerland game. And without, we always talked about the Immobile-Belotti dynamic, but now without neither of them, it's a very big, let's say, mystery as to who's going to occupy the centre backs.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I noticed this morning in particular, speak about Verratti being out, there was no one in that midfield three who was actually able to get things moving and offer any sort of creativity because we knew what was going to happen. We knew Northern Ireland were going to throw 11 players back behind the ball. We knew it was going to be tight. We knew they were going to play for a goalless draw. And I think this game really exposed the flaws of that front three that we didn't see in the Euros, in games where they were a bit more chaotic. You could, go P&P with guys like Chiesa on the wing. Insigne, who played sort of as a false nine, him and Berardi sort of switched as the game went on, but they weren't able to get into the game whatsoever. But, it is interesting. I mean, I know there are players out, but I don't think that that's really an excuse because there's enough quality there still. But without Verratti, man, like that midfield just looks lost.
Yeah. And so any talk about individual player quality in isolation becomes secondary, at least I think, because he's the only one who really, out of that Italian midfield, with the exception of, let's say, to a lesser extent, but he's not Marco Verratti. The only player who is like Verratti in a certain way is Stefano Sensi. You look at, Locatelli, Jorginho, Barella, they're all kind of, not Barella, but like Locatelli and Jorginho are very deep sitting midfielders, distributing midfielders. They're not ones who are going to really, let's say, dictate tempo. They kind of need reference points, and that's why, next to Verratti, Jorginho looks like a world beater. Excuse me. But then, and without that, and something we also saw at the Euro, without Verratti, like Insigne becomes the reference point or becomes the outlet ball out wide, so then players can run and work around him. Then playing him as a 9 tonight or this morning, it kind of made that worse. And there was that early chance for Chiesa where he's basically received the ball on the touchline, done about 5 step overs for a little consequence, and they're going to look one-dimensional in a certain way, and that works for a team like Northern Ireland. And to be honest, they even had the opportunity to snatch the game late.
To be honest, they probably should have won. Let's be real. I mean, if it wasn't for Connor Washington absolutely just, crapping the proverbial the last minute and just passing the ball to Bonucci on the goal line, it should have been 1-0. I mean, you look at the whole team. Donnarumma looked shaky. Defensively, the centre-back partnership, you spoke about it before, but Acerbi and Bonucci I don't think is a functional... We've spoken so many times, and we'll talk about it later, is Acerbi in a back four. There's always been that issue, without Bastoni, without Chiellini, to even a bigger extent without Romagnoli, who I think is still a glaring omission from this squad, even though he's not playing as the sort of part of the main partnership for Milan week in and week out. But then you look at, as we spoke about Chiesa, is that, everyone was fiending about Chiesa during the Euros, right? Especially because in games against teams like Austria, when the game became a little bit more chaotic, he looked unbelievable. Against Spain off the break, he looked unbelievable. Against England, it was the same thing. Against Belgium, it was the same thing. But when he's come up against teams like Switzerland now, and against teams like Northern Ireland, and even to a bigger extent, you think back to that Bulgaria game, the 1-1 draw, it was the same thing. And you can look at this game and go in a vacuum and say, yep, it was a poor game. But this has been a poor 3 windows in a row. I mean, you look back to the 1-1 draw against Bulgaria. You look at the 0-0 against Switzerland, the 1-1 against Switzerland. You even look at the way, I know against Spain, it was a Nations League game and they got the red card and everything else, but they weren't that great.
And the reality is, you can even go all the way back to the start of Mancini's tenure at the start of the Nations League, and how kind of relatively poorly they performed against Poland and Portugal. Yeah. And that was, again, without Verratti at the start of the phase. And then Verratti came into it, and then, everything was hunky-dory after that. I mean, he allows and facilitates so much in play for Italy that it doesn't expose Italian players individually in a certain sense. But the question is now, okay, let's say you don't have Verratti. How do you fix it?
There's no real answer to that, because there's no one that can. There's no one that can. I think, because you mentioned Stefano Sensi, but he's not playing. So that's the issue. Mancini won't pick him.
Now, I know this might be out of left field, but would you play Pobega instead of Locatelli?
Well, he was called up. He didn't feature on the bench in any of the games, but he wasn't called up. I mean, Locatelli hasn't been great at Juventus. Let's be real. Tonali got his chance, but he was not playing in the role. Again, similar player. He's not going to be that guy on the left side of midfield.
That's right.
To be that sort of play, he functions really well playing deeper. Pobega, I think, is a left field choice that could work. By the time we see Italy again in March, this could be a very different Italian team that does roll up. They might look at, they've probably, in terms of Mancini and the way that he's favoured certain players in selection, unfortunately, Pobega might not even get called up because, Lorenzo Pellegrini might be back. And Verratti might actually, knock him out of the squad, unfortunately. But they need Verratti back either way. But I think Pobega, in terms of what he brings to the table, is probably the best sort of option to try and stretch defenders. And I think...
especially in the three. You know, like if they're not going to play, if Mancini's going to stay with this, let's say three-man midfield and like Jorginho in a single pivot, you know, if in the event you don't have Sensi, in the event you don't have Verratti, he might be a feasible option in relation to Locatelli. Barella's spot is basically security, respective of what he does and doesn't provide for Italy. I think like his status now has just made him basically undroppable, for better or worse. I think if you know, let's say in the event of absences of certain others, like he might be a feasible solution, because he is one who is. He might not be technically as proficient, but he's at least willing to go into certain spaces to receive the ball, and he pulls defenders in a certain way that, let's say, let's be frank, Locatelli doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, Barella, to use almost a literature term, it's like he has significant plot armor. You know, he can play as poorly as he wants, but they're not going to kill him off. You know, he might be such an insignificant character, but if he's ever in a predicament, he could be. You know, there was, how long ago was it? A week and a half ago, he had that, you know, hamstring he pulled his hamstring in the derby, and there were doubts about him even playing. Is he even 100%? But are they just rolling him out because it's Nicolo Barella in this sort of instance? So it will. I think these playoffs are going to say a lot, though. I think that in terms of speaking about the new playoff format, I think that because they're one-off games, it suits Italy a lot more than 2017, where they were two-legged affairs, and one deflected goal can mean that the opposition can come to Italy, put 11 men back behind the ball, and do exactly what they did in Milan on that night. So I'd be curious to see who they come up against. They're going to miss Portugal at least at the start, which I guess is some silver lining. But other than that, like, it'll be interesting to see what happens over those two games, if they get to two games.
Yeah, at the same time though, we're still yet to determine who the other two teams are. So, you know, we could have a rematch of Turkey from memory, and you also have, let's say, because I think it's the Finland group. So let's say if both France and Ukraine win their games tomorrow morning, then it'll be Ukraine that goes into the playoff, and they're not exactly a simple or a easy opposition either. So, and Finland have actually also been strong in this qualification phase, irrespective of their low ranking on the name recognition index. So, like, there aren't going to be any easy ties.
No.
I think it's, you know, as simple as it sounds, like Italy have simply complicated matters for themselves.
Absolutely. It could have been, you know, sort of easy. You know, you go into this next period where you don't have to worry about high-stakes games. You can start to prepare for Qatar and get friendlies out of the way, try some new players. But now it's more high-stakes. It's more pressure on them. And I remember, you know, hearing all this stuff. Like, I saw some tweets this morning, people saying, this is when Italy thrive. To be honest, it's not like that. I was listening to Alessandro Del Piero on Saturday after the Switzerland game. And he said, everyone talks about the fact that, you know, Italy love the drama. But to be honest, in a lot of the big games, Italy have always found a way to stuff it up. Penalty shootouts, big high-stakes games where they've just not been able to break down teams. Winning the Euros, how they did it, and even the 2006 World Cup, is a rarity for Italy. When you think about the history of the national team, it's not necessarily, this is not, looking at all this now and looking at the teams that are there, this is a really tough set of teams. Right now we're looking at, you know, Portugal, Scotland as well to a lesser extent. If you have to go to Hampton Park,
shout out to young boy.
Yeah, shout out to young boy. He's excited. Russia, obviously you saw Russia yesterday against Croatia. Sweden, Poland, and then obviously North Macedonia through to that next round. Then obviously you got three more teams, I think maybe Wales, Austria, Turkey or Finland. They're not going to be easy games.
And yeah, specifically, I you know, having watched the Croatia-Russia game yesterday, like, and even in the first game, they are very well organized defensively under Valeri Karpin. And like a team like Croatia or a team like Italy could be able to play out, but it's not exactly a simple task, you know. Like, I think, there aren't any, let's say, cut and dry, simple fixtures in this playoff. And fitness will be absolutely key for Italy because functionality of the team depends on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, let's put the Italian national team to a side. Let's come into what we were actually going to be talking about mainly today, and that is the best league in the world in the Italian Serie A. Obviously, back this weekend after the international break. Before the international break, it really started to heat up and had the perfect crescendo in the Milan derby. And I would say we'd start with Napoli, but I think it's best to start with Milan because they are top of the table, a tie with Napoli right now. It was an interesting month between windows for Milan because they had a lot of injuries. They found a way to get results. Some of them weren't necessarily pretty.
A bit like last season.
It felt a bit like deja vu, especially those games against Bologna and Hellas Verona. But they came out of that derby, perhaps, I think that was a bit of a weird game because they probably should have won that game in the end because of the substitutions that they made at halftime or in the second half.
Yeah, like I think this is kind of lingered with respect to Milan, but I think the last month specifically has underlined the limitations of the front four, especially when, and even to a further extent, underlined Adebic's importance in front of Giroud and
I can't believe you're saying this.
I can't believe I'm saying this either. I really can't believe I'm doing this. Like I was saying, this is my footballing equivalent to Stockholm syndrome, basically. Like basically coming to the realization that Adebic is Milan's best option up at centre forward. I think irrespective of how this season goes, I think Milan need to actually sign a centre forward that fits. And I don't think, let's say, and there was talk during the week that or over the weekend that they were looking at signing Renato Sanchez. Like, I don't think midfield is specifically the issue with Milan. It's, that front four. And the compositions of the front four, what the individuals within those front four compositions bring, I think the midfield masks that to a certain extent. And let's say if Benasser is not going to be fit every game, he's starting to find that early season form from last season. He really hit the ground running last season, but having contracted COVID, he's had to kind of work his way into this season. I don't think Pioli should be going away from the Benasser Tonali double pivot, because I think that's probably the best option going forward for them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's this weird, we've spoken about this weird fandom among Milan fans for how good Francesi is, but I think that some people are now starting to realise that he's extremely limited.
He's not that guy.
He's not it. And I think right now, if, Tottenham do offer what they are going to offer for Francesi and he walked, even if it was for free, they can take him. And you spoke about midfield not being the issue, Ante. Like, Pobega and Adli coming back for nothing at the end of this season is the least of Milan's problems. If Renato Sanchez came in, it'd have to be with, Bakayoko's loans being cancelled or Rade Krunic is being sold. But I think that the interesting thing is about that front line, because it does almost underpin the importance of bringing Andrea Bellotti at the end of the season.
He would score 50 goals a season with this Milan team. He would be extraordinary. But that's, speaking of the Kessie situation, like that's when you look at Theo Hernandez and Benasser willing to accept, €4.5 million salary, and Kessie is looking for double that, and he's like a lesser player than those two. Like, I think for a team like Milan that has been, thrifty in recent past and have actually made sound decisions with respect to squad composition, I think we're becoming ever closer to Kessie leaving.
And I think it's not the worst thing, because you look at the history of Francesi at Milan. It hasn't necessarily been a smooth ride. It's been very bumpy. There's been
couldn't wipe his proverbial without Benasser.
Yeah, and we didn't see him hit his best form until Ismail Benasser and him were actually playing together. And I think that even when you look at when he first came in and he had that good burst of form at Atalanta under Gasperini and everything else, and I think everyone sort of thought, this guy's going to be the answer. He's the next Yaya Toure because he plays a similar role and everything, but he's not the same. And he scores a lot of penalties, but that's about it.
I think Frank Kessie was one of the original members of the Gasparini midfield attacks. And like you look, he's been able to effectively do the same thing with Freuler and De Roon. If Freuler and De Roon went into different systems, they would be just as, mediocre and dependent on a reference point. You can look at De Roon for the, Dutch national team. It's the same thing. I don't think Kessie is indispensable, nor should he be worth the salary he and his agent are asking for.
Well, I mean, Tottenham will field that sort of...
And they'll overpay.
Yeah, and to be honest, you know what? I feel this is an interesting point because I think if he goes and plays in the Premier League, I think he'd be great in the Premier League. In a contest system.
Yeah.
Just playing as destroyer.
Yeah, well, that would also depend on if they sign Brozovic as well, because I really don't want Brozovic at Inter anymore. You know how torn I am watching Brozovic get to this level and practically be the best defensive midfielder in the world, but doing it at Inter, I just have this really huge cognitive dissonance with it. He was so good against Milan, by the way. He was exceptional.
It was painful watching Rade Krunic have to be the man that's sort of going up against Marcelo Brozovic. When I saw the starting lineup and I saw Diaz out wide and Krunic as a 10, there was this collective sort of sigh here we go again, And I know that Krunic is a Stefano Pioli boy because he works hard and he gives 110%, but for what he offers going forward, it's just not there. Big month coming up for Milan before the next break. And I think, we can essentially rule Champions League out. There's some big games coming up against teams like Fiorentina, Sassuolo, and the big one on the 20th against Napoli next month. Where do you see Milan heading into Christmas? Do you see them sticking with Napoli? Can you see that game against Napoli still being in a similar boat where both teams are still locked on similar points and it being as important the title race as is now?
I think the stakes are are as high as they could be even going into the end of the season, because with AFCON coming up, both Milan and Napoli have their most important players are going to be out for a month. And so they need to pick up as many points as they can going into January. And that game just before Christmas, I cannot wait for it. I think it's going to be awesome. I do see it being, let's say, but then again, it depends on how Inter Napoli goes this weekend as well. Yeah. And that's kind of been the thing. If Milan were able to win against Inter, that would have opened up breathing room between Napoli, Milan, and then Inter in third. Inter are now kind of hanging in there. And, you can't kind of rule them out.
No, you can't.
You can't at all.
If they win this weekend, it's going to make things really interesting.
Yeah.
And let's talk about Napoli whilst we're here. I mean, they came out of the international break, they hit some good form, but it wasn't necessarily the best month. Like when you look at their results as a whole, the 0-0 against Roma on the road just after they got banged around by Bodo Glimt. The scrappy 1-0 win against Salernitana. They were perhaps unlucky not to beat Hellas Verona before the break, but Hellas Verona have proved in this Igor Turdo, as we'll talk about later, this 10-game run.
Yeah.
They've proven not to be an easy beat. But Napoli, the wheels were they were hanging on. And now everyone's saying, well, this is now where they're going to be tested because they've got Inter, they've got Spartak Moscow, Lazio, Sassuolo, Atalanta, Leicester, Milan in this run. There's a lot of tough games.
Huge month for Napoli. And that was kind of the lingering, let's say, narrative in relation to the start of their season. That the opposition they came against wasn't as strong as it could be. But they've been strong. They are strong, irrespective of the opposition. I think that's undeniable. However, this is when you do have these kinds of games in succession, you get to see what a team is made of mentally as well. And this is, I think they've, let's say, Excuse me. Sorry. I think they are contenders, like for the title as the season goes on. But it all comes down to, let's say, the first, like this game coming up against Inter and, the Milan game just before Christmas. Like, they're going to be huge, man. Yeah. It's going to be so good.
And I think defensively has been the one thing that I've been super impressed by. 4 goals conceded in 12 games is just ridiculous.
And with Manolas not playing either, really.
Yeah, and Koulibaly missed the last game against Hellas Verona as well. This game against Inter, if they can go to the San Siro and get all 3 points,
that's huge.
That is massive, not just for Napoli's title hopes, but just to create that separation, especially if Milan beat Fiorentina this weekend too, because it makes it that really locks in that it's going to be a 2-horse race. I know so much football still to be played, but
not necessarily, because I think they're with Milan and Napoli. I think there will be a drop-off, kind of accelerated by AFCON.
Yeah.
And so that'll open up possibilities for your Inter, or, if they were consistent in Atalanta, for example. I don't see Roma, in any serious nature at all. And Juve, where you were thinking, Juve might, it was after the first few weeks, Allegri will figure it out, but they're not going to catch him. They're not going to catch him. Even if they go gangbusters in the second half of the season, there's already too big a gap. I think Inter is in good position they've got 1 point out of that. If they can get 3 points this weekend, that does massive favours for their title hopes. Yeah. As weird as it might sound to be saying something like this in the middle of November, but with the whole season in context, especially when I think the winner's going to take less than the winner of the Serie A is going to take less than 85 points. These kinds of games are absolutely critical. And so if Inter can win, that's huge.
Well, you look at this month coming up for Inter, it's quite a favourable run. I mean, after Napoli, Venezia, Spezia, Roma away, they'd really fancied themselves in that one. Cagliari, Salernitana, Torino in that last game before Christmas. In between, obviously. Yeah, and obviously the games against Shakhtar and Real Madrid, interspersed between, there's some big games for Inter, and they started to hit some okay form. They started to, they've been the weird case of this season that we just don't know. Coming into the season after they lost those players, we're like, are they still a contender? Are they not? But the factor of Edin Dzeko, the factor of those players that they've been able to still steady the ship, and especially in midfield, being able to get the best out of Marcelo Brozovic alongside the players that he has. With Hakan Çalhanoğlu, I know that he put in his look, just about Hakan Çalhanoğlu, right? There were a lot of Interisti on Twitter that were fiending about his performance against Milan, right? He did some good things, but it was the same thing. Yeah, there was nothing spectacular.
It's what Milan fans would see. Yeah, exactly. He would, he's a final ball and little else. So he'll hit that final ball and he'll look like, oh my God, what a player Hakan is. But a lot of what else he brings outside of pressing is pretty mediocre.
I remember.
So, pressing in a final ball, that's fine, but there's a big trade-off that comes with that. And as long as you do have players like a Brozovic next to him, he's going to be fine. Interisti will learn soon enough that they're a bit hasty with that.
Yeah, and I remember there was one play that kind of underpinned that. I think it was within the first couple minutes of the game. Çalhanoğlu picked up the ball in space, 30 yards out, had Dzeko and Martinez making the runs, just pops a shot, blocks straight into Simon Kjaer. It's that is Çalhanoğlu. That is Hakan for you, he thinks he's better than what he thinks he's, you saw his Instagram post before the game.
My goodness.
Him taking on himself and, the Duomo in the background and everything. It was just, man.
If there could be any, visual representation of this guy having insanely irrational confidence, then that was it. Like you don't even have to watch him play football anymore. You know what he's like on the pitch just by seeing that IG post. It was insane.
Yeah, but just about Inter, I mean, they've done all right. I've got to give them credit in what Simone Inzaghi's been able to do, and especially I've been impressed with Inter how they've bounced back. I know they've played Sheriff in the Champions League, but they weren't an easy beat in those first couple games. But to get back, the mighty Tiraspol, they've done a good job, but they've been able to actually steady the ship in the Champions League. I mean, they're in a position to progress. Big games against Shakhtar and Real Madrid to come up as well. But they would consider themselves a real chance to be one of those teams in the Champions League right now to, I wouldn't say go on a run, but at least to maybe get to the quarters.
Yeah, look, I think it is a tough group all the same. It'll depend, one, on fitness at Real Madrid, and whether De Zerbi at Shakhtar actually takes a punt on Marcos Antonio, who's his best midfielder, and doesn't play him. Never mind. But I think Inter have stabilised. And we were saying at the start of the season, there is going to be a drop-off. And, they're not necessarily indestructible in the way, or inevitable in the way that they were under Conte. Like Inzaghi has taken that element of Pazzo that he had at Lazio, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I remember we were talking about it off air, even the Samp game. And Samp haven't actually been very good this season, but they looked shaky against Samp. And they do have that element in them. But I think over the past month, they have stabilised. They found out that they now have familiarity between the players now. And I think the dynamic between Brozovic and Dzeko, for everyone else to work off, I think they're starting to kind of figure it out now.
Yeah, I think the one thing that sort of caught my eye, especially from the derby, was just Inter looking very open when Milan made changes and really altered sort of I don't think Inzaghi coached the game, sort of changed what he was trying to what Milan were trying to do in the second half. When Milan brought on Salamakers, brought on Kalulu, brought on Benacer and Rebic, Milan looked a lot better and a lot more, threatening. And that back three, as much as it served Antonio Conte brilliantly last season, they haven't looked like that this year. But not even just in the derby, but in a lot of other games too.
Yeah. But that's kind of been that was kind of the knock on Inzaghi even when he was at Lazio as well. Like his in-game adjustment was at times found wanting, and I think that's happened in a few games this season where the wrong sub here and there can shift the momentum in favor of the opposition, and that was the thing about the derby as well. Like Pioli adjusted as well as he could have, whereas Inzaghi kind of exacerbated matters. And that's where Milan probably had enough momentum to suggest that, or to state the case that they could have won that game or should have won that game. But just as an aside, it is so awesome to have a Milan derby that means something again. Even coming into last season, like just the atmosphere, the play, just the drama of the games itself. Like, as someone who grew up watching Serie A, this is it's kind of like I've been taken back to being a kid again watching these games. It's so great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've seen a lot more Milan derbies than I have in terms of the ones in the 90s and everything, but from memory, I have traumatizing memories for Milan derbies, man. Like, I think back to 2010. I think it was one in 2009 where Inter smacked us 4-0 when Leonardo just took over, and it was like Maicon just absolutely blew through Milan. And I think about the 4-2 in 2012 that secured Juve to win the Scudetto under Stramaccioni. There's
and then going into the Banta era after 2013.
Yeah. But there was some good ones in the Banta era. De Jong scoring a header and winning 1-0. There's been some memorable ones. And I think last season it was a shame with the 3 derbies we had last season, including the Coppa, we had no fans. Because that would have been nuts with fans.
And you think and that's actually been not just the fact that they've meant something, but how tight these games have been and how they've been defined by very fine margins. Even the first derby last season, they were tight games, and you can tell that there's a lot at stake here, both in terms of personal, professional pride, in isolated circumstances in the game itself, but there's also the calculations of what it all means. It's just awesome to have these games mean something, or not necessarily mean something. They always mean something, but the fact that you have two relevant contending teams for the Scudetto and they're fighting, you can tell, it's just really awesome to see these games back in the statue in which they belong.
I still believe the 2020 derby, the 4-2, the comeback was what, literally started the pandemic. And that was, after that, nothing was the same. It felt like everything changed. And to be honest, it did for Milan too, because that was at that point where Milan started to find their feet under Stefano Pioli. And to be honest, if you remember that game very well, Milan should have probably won that game. I mean, that in itself was just an unbelievable contest. But let's move on. Let's talk about the other guys just below them, obviously the other Nerazzurri, and that's Atalanta. They've had a very odd period of time, defensively all over the shop. They show glimpses of what they can do, that they've still got that bit of, it's when they go for a bit of excitement, but they just are so open.
Yeah. The thing is, the thing about Atalanta has always been the relationship between attack and defense. More than anyone in Serie A, because they are so open offensively. And I think this season, we kind of, not to labor the point, but I think this season has kind of underlined just how transformative Papu Gomez was for them. Yeah. And then the relationship, it means, where they, let's say, pull defenses. And so let's say if the opposition defense pulls the ball, are they within a relative structure to be able to transition effectively and put Atalanta under pressure? And that was why they would have a lot of goals where they would be able to, let's say, keep possession, and then they'll lose the ball. Then they'll be able to win it back quickly and then score like a counter on a counter. That necessarily doesn't exist anymore because you don't have the opposition defenses scrambled as they were initially with Atalanta's possession. And that's what Gomez provided. I don't understand Gasperini's adherence to system in the way that, with respect to De Roon and Freuler, I think he should just be playing Malinowski deeper, and be playing guys like Miranchuk, Pasalic as that effective let's say penalty area entry and threat. Ilicic, he's not going to do it every week, but you could probably rotate him effectively. And he coming into the international break, he did show that to a certain extent. But they're just so volatile as a means of the system itself and the perception of the importance of that system.
And I think they've been exposed a little bit defensively with Toloi going down. They've had to move De Roon into a back three. And I still think with Koopmeiners in, it's still very much the same. Not much has really changed. I know they've lost Hatterborg and Gosens, and they've had injuries. But that's one thing. Robin Gosens is so important to how they attack on that left-hand side. But they've got issues, especially, as you said, that there doesn't feel like there's much of a balance because they were able to counteract that a lot in the past by just being able to put 4 or 5 in the net. This season, they're not getting 4 or 5 in the net. I think because a lot of times, I think the games everyone, the generic football fan would have seen from Atalanta are the 2 Manchester United comebacks. But in itself, Atalanta probably should have won both of those games. But that was born of the fact of just moments.
Manchester United were just so bad in possession.
There was just moments. And, moments of a freakish Cristiano Ronaldo finish in Bergamo where there's, Donny van der Beek comes on, stretches defenders, and a game changes. I know it's not a Premier League podcast, but, this is essentially what happened. And if you've got a midfielder like that in your team coming up against Atalanta, you're going to have problems. You remember how Sandro Tonali played against Atalanta before the last international break? He just completely had them running ragged. He had them running doggies all game. And if you get players in those spaces, when you have a guy like Brahim Diaz or someone like Salamakers or Rafael Leao, who just, with Leao with his great vibes and, if he's going at you in a back three, it's over. It's over for you. So, look, I think it's a big month for Atalanta. They've still got Champions League with Young Boys and Villarreal. They got Juve away I think in 2 weeks' time, Napoli away during this period, Roma, Hellas Verona. Big games.
Big month.
Big games for them.
Big month. And I think we can determine their legitimacy for the Scudetto. I think they'll stay in the race for the top 4, and that's fine. I don't think that's up for debate. But it's like this month, and they're not the only team in this one, but I think we can either put a line in them or put a line under them with respect to the Scudetto race this month.
I think we need to give it another little bit because, as you said with AFCON, that's when they might start to make some inroads. From the top of my head, I don't think they're going to lose anyone, or maybe, if anything, that will be the period where I think it'll be interesting to see who closes that gap.
But they still need to stay in touch.
Yes.
They still need to stay in relative touch. They can't, let's say fall off, because there's already a pretty decent gap between Milan, Napoli, and the rest. If they fall further behind over the next month, then it's going to be not necessarily over, but it's going to be a very hard task to be able to catch them.
Because you have to rely on basically Milan and Napoli dropping at least. By that stage, if we're talking, say that Milan and Napoli...
February, January,
5 or 6 games are going to have to drop. And it's not going to be points. They have to be losses. And I don't see Milan and Napoli losing 5 or 6 games in that period. Moving on to Lazio. Again, like up and down this month, but a bit better in some points. Like they beat Inter at home. They got spanked by Hellas Verona on the road. They drew with Atalanta. They got a win against Salernitana just coming into the international break, but a big game against Juve and Napoli back-to-back. How have you seen them under Sarri in this period? Because they've been a bit of a weird watch, like a lot of these teams in that area so far. They're hard to really get a bit of a read on.
What was actually interesting about the Salernitana game was that he started Cataldi. And I think... even from the start of the season, Lucas Leiva didn't necessarily look the most assured of figures at the base of that Lazio midfield. And he doesn't necessarily provide what Sarri is after. This plays into the whole thing, or the dynamic of Lazio's midfield being everything for that team. And, more than other opposition in the league. And so Milinkovic-Savic and Luis Alberto really have to be dropping monster performances for Lazio to be relatively assured. Then, at the same time, Luis Alberto is not even playing every week because at times he's gone with Toma Basic and Milinkovic-Savic. So that creates different kind of responsibilities and burdens for players like Felipe Anderson and Pedro as well. And then you have, like we were saying at the top of this, the defensive susceptibilities of players like Acerbi in a 4, and they're just so volatile, but fun.
Yeah, they're very entertaining. It's exactly what we thought they would be. I think the interesting thing about Luis Alberto is you got to think about what's his headspace. He doesn't want to be there. He's made that very clear. He wants out. If you're Lazio and you're in this situation, I know how important Luis Alberto is. He's probably one of, if not the best attacking midfielder in the league. Do you get to a point where you just have to ask the question of, all right, if he really wants to go, we've got to make that move? Or do you
have to cut bait?
Yeah, or do you, and you try your luck to try find someone else who can maybe try and do that role?
That's the thing.
What?
I think you have to have let's say, contingencies in place before that happens, especially for a player so important, irrespective of where he is professionally, or where he is, mentally, if you want to call it that, or psychologically. You can still at least rely on something, professional conduct. Yeah. And you can at least rely on certain base level in terms of performance. But if you were Lazio, Iglitare wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't looking for contingencies right now.
What about Mattia Zaccagni? He's already there. I mean, do you think that was more of a depth sign? I think that was maybe the contingency.
Yeah, I think that may have been a depth signing, because if it was a contingency, he would have played more to this point.
True. true. That's actually a good point. I mean, unless they're relying on Tomabasic, but then again, though,
he's not Luis Alberto.
It's just not it. I think if Luis Alberto leaves, Lazio's going to find themselves falling out of this top 4 race very, very quickly. But it's interesting because between him and Milinkovic-Savic, you think the amount how long Milinkovic-Savic has sort of come to the fore as the player he is. He's always been linked to a move away, but he's never gone.
Yeah. It's never actually happened. Like it's always kind of been someone else who's like, let's say, at a quote unquote big club. There's always been another signing that's kind of scuppered a potential move for Milinkovic-Savic, and he absolutely has the quality to play at the highest levels of football. But I think it's more just a circumstantial thing as opposed to anything else.
Yeah. No, I get what you mean. And I was just having a look at Luis Alberto's contract. It's not like he's going to be walking for free anytime soon. He's contracted for another 3 years. Lazio have got him tied down, and if you're gonna want him, you're gonna have to pay big for him. And I do wonder if I don't think that they would sell him to an Italian team. Because unless it was for, say, some ridiculous like Urbano Cairo kind of Andrea Bellotti price tag, but you run the risk of, the fact that there might be another team that's short-handed from a different league. Obviously, if a team from Spain comes along, which he might think about making a move back to La Liga, which I think he'd be great in La Liga. I think going back there would be a move for him. I just don't want to see him back in the Premier League.
Yeah, like I think there are. If his agent was speaking, if his agent was doing his job, I think his agent would be cognizant of the fact that there are only certain destinations that Luis Alberto can go to. Yeah. At the same time, how much will money play a part? Yeah. At the same time, I don't see a Milik situation at Napoli, for example. I don't think that's happening with Luis Alberto. Though.
No, I agree.
Like, let's say if a transfer doesn't come up in January.
Yeah. I could see that he'll probably at least see the season out if it doesn't happen. And I think as you did say, professional conduct, he'd go through this year, and hopefully we can see a lot more of him because we haven't seen a lot of him this season. We want to see more because he's that good. Let's move on to their Roman rivals, and that's obviously Roma. They've had the month from hell, really, and I think that we've started to see what they truly are. It's the facade has dropped and the pressure is building. And that loss against Venezia before the international break summed up Roma to an absolute, that game was literally just everything that Roma is. You give them the ball, they're going to shoot all day, but going back the other way defensively, they are a sieve. And they were just completely torn to bits by Venezia off the break and lost 3-2.
Yeah. And it wasn't even the Venezia game. You think about, let's say, they had half an hour against a 10-man Milan after Theo Hernandez was sent off, and they looked absolutely toothless. There was one moment I remember in that Milan game specifically where I think it was El Shawari gets the ball out wide, and Jean Vertout spams like this third-man run behind the defensive line. He's never in any position to receive the ball. Benased kind of tracks the run initially, then he's like, oh yeah, you're not going to get the ball. And so Ben ends up just going to El Shawari. El Shawari circulates possession, and they cross Bam for nothing. The Roma just aren't good with the ball. And so as a consequence, they're going to get hit on the counter, especially for a team that doesn't press in the way that, that notoriously don't under Mourinho. And that's where, a lot of the criticism lies with Mourinho. Oh, he's not modern defensively, but I think secondary to the fact that they just don't play well with the ball.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And I think in a lot of these games, even in the Conference League, against Bodo Glimt, going there and losing 6-1 is not it. And we've seen it already in terms of Mourinho's conduct, in terms of, he started the typical throwing players under the bus.
And the referees under the bus.
And, look, I see that Roma on paper, their squad isn't that great. Like, let's put this, let's make this abundantly clear. This squad is not that great, and there are a lot of glaring weaknesses, especially in the middle of the park, especially how slow they are defensively. But they've got that, and the thing is, you could still make it work with what they've got. If you're a good coach, with what they've got, there's still enough to at least make them a competent unit.
I'm not necessarily sure.
You don't think so?
I think that's the case.
I think you can at least put something out.
I think that is a really poorly composed squad that Mourinho exacerbates with his implementation, and and that was kind of, you know, what I was thinking would be confirmed over the last month, and we just about had it. Like they had that game where they could just sit against Napoli and, you know, basically do what they could to hold on for a point and stop them from winning the game. But yeah, like they're against better opposition, even against weaker opposition, if they're going to have the ball, they're always going to have this certain susceptibility. And, you know, now with that honeymoon period over, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out for the rest of the season.
And their issues going forward as well. You know, Tammy Abraham has stopped scoring. He scored against Venezia, but he's not scoring at the same level as he was at the start of the season. They've tried now him and Shmorodov leading the line together as a front two. Zaniolo looks very rusty after coming back from all the injuries. He doesn't look the same sort of player. I know everyone's been fiending about Lorenzo Pellegrini, but he has the easiest job in this team. He just has to spam the box late with runs and get on the scraps. And he does it. He does it better than anybody. You know, the Veretout Cristante midfield partnership, as we spoke about, it's so one-dimensional.
It's disgusting.
It is. And even
if you play Viard looks technically great, but he's technically proficient, let's say, in comparison to a Cristante or a Veretout, but his positioning is still just as conservative as theirs. So your technical aptitude becomes, you know, a moot point. They, like you said, like they are a highly one-dimensional midfield, and as a consequence, it doesn't matter who you put, you know, in, let's say, in the attacking third of the pitch, because the positions in which you're going to get them the ball are going to be very compartmentalized.
And also, you have to wonder, I mean, when I see someone like Cristante, I think back to when I saw him probably play at his best was in the middle of a back three, sort of being a distributing ball-playing centre-back. Yeah. I don't see, if you're going to play a slow defence, I know they haven't really got options in the middle of the park, but I mean, if they'll just sign someone else in there, which I think they desperately need to, because Amadou Diawara is not going to fix that, but you could probably put him in there if you're going to go with a back three, if you want to change things up. But again, you know, looking at their depth out wide, you know, with Rick Karsdorp and now El Shaarawy playing as wing-backs, that's not sustainable in terms of El Shaarawy's fitness. We don't know how many games you're going to get at El Shaarawy as a left wing-back.
Especially in the absence of Spinazzola.
Yes, absolutely.
I think Spinazzola changes the dynamics there, yeah.
But we don't know. Yeah. Depends on his recovery. You know, I saw someone tweeting today saying, hopefully Spinazzola's back playing for Italy in March. I don't think he'll be back playing at all.
That's probably not happening, man. It's probably not happening.
And to be honest, he then has to go through his rehab, build up form, and then, you know,
he's behind the eight ball this season. So to expect him to have any kind of impact in this season at all is impractical.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on. Let's talk quickly about Fiorentina, and we'll get to Juventus as well. Fiorentina,
we haven't even spoken about you.
We still haven't, because they're eighth, man.
They've been so mid. They've been so crap.
They have. Look, you know, let's actually go with you a bit. I mean, we may as well. Like, we've opened the can of worms. The highlight is still, you know, I mean, Allegri rocks up every week. He says "Buona giornata." He says that he thinks things are going to change, but nothing has. I mean, this has been such a strange period where there was a period after that poor start where they started to get some wins, and we thought, oh no, here we go again. But then afterwards, they just regress.
But I think part of those results and part of those wins, I think we kind of always accepted that the performance was bad.
Yeah.
Or that the performance was subpar. So like the underlying factors that you know dictate results, like if you're looking at it sustainably, like they're not there. And so, you know, we were talking about Roma having an imbalanced squad and a bad midfield. Like that's just as prevalent with Juve. And, you know,
You know what was the strangest thing? This week I saw it. It was Dybala's 28th birthday a few days ago.
28.
He's 28. Like, you think, he was always like, where did the time go? Dybala.
To be honest, you think about it, after Ronaldo signed, it feels like went into a black hole.
Ruined his career, man.
Yeah.
It ruined his career. Like, you think about the not ruined his career, but kind of
stunted.
Yeah, or at least the ceiling that he had, potentially going into 2018, where he was exceptional. Him and Higuain had, one of the coolest strike partnerships or attacking partnerships I've ever seen in Serie A. And then Ronaldo comes in and it just, like, one rotten apple ruins the whole barrel, for example. And Juve, this is like the culmination of all that.
Yeah.
Not even not winning Serie A last season, like this, like they've just left with this
mess,
absolute mess, because the Hurricanes come through and torn everything to shreds. Like, I will admit though, it is highly satisfying to watch.
It is brilliant. I mean, square pegs in round holes is what I'm seeing right now. A lot of square pegs in round holes. The system for what they've got is not compatible. Playing Adrien Rabiot as a left wing still and going with McKennie and Locatelli as a midfield partnership is
he's not Matuidi, for example.
No.
Because he did try, it worked for Allegri with Matuidi in that role because it was a second ball machine and, was a good complement to who he already had in midfield with Pjanic. But if you have, who you currently have in midfield for Juve, it's not going to work.
No.
However much, let's say a Dybala or Morata, to a lesser extent, might be able to counteract that in terms of phase of possession and responsibilities, in terms of opening the game up for everyone. But yeah, I personally don't. I'm personally confused with the lack of game time given to Kulusevski.
In this system, I mean, Juve fans use him as sort of the whipping boy. Every time he plays, everyone's always like, "Oh God, this guy's not it." But you think the way Juve want to play, he actually wouldn't be the worst player to have either on a wing, up top.
Because he practically plays that way for the national team anyway.
Yeah, he does. And it literally wouldn't be the worst option. I think about, their persistence with Bernardeschi, who has played a lot of football in different roles under Allegri. Is he the answer? Definitely not. He's not the guy who's going to fix things for them. Chiesa has moments, but as we saw again this morning, if you give him the ball and you put players back behind the ball, he'll do a few step overs.
He's the Italian. He's the Italian Rebic.
We're getting to that point.
He's the Italian Rebic. He's just this guy who can run a lot, is really uncoordinated, but has a rational confidence, and he's going to try.
Yeah.
Sorry, he's going to try things. There's no middle ground with a Chiesa. He's either going to look like a world beater or he's going to look absolutely disastrous.
Absolutely.
And especially in this system where you have so isolated reference points in terms of how they play in possession, it creates certain exposure for someone like Chiesa.
Yeah, and I think with, just in terms of him himself, I think that people look at his highlight reel and think that, he's an absolute world beater. Because the things he does, the moments, some of them you're like,
the
Jesus,
moments are great.
Unbelievable. But I think that people don't this is what irks me about when people watch plays like Chiesa and even about Serie A as a whole. People see things in a vacuum but don't actually look at the whole picture. It's like with Morata, it's the opposite. People look at his misses. They don't look at what he does when he actually gets on the ball and his link-up play with Paulo Dybala. That front partnership, if they had a functional midfield behind it, that could be very dangerous.
It would be great.
Fantastic, but they don't. McKennie and Locatelli as a partnership is not it. They don't have those sort of players for what they want to play because let's be real. Americans love Weston McKennie, right? He's some national hero, right? You know, there's this weird sort of like, I used to think he was all right, and then I was watching a bit more, I'm like, oh, he's just the same. They've all got the same midfielders. They offer nothing. You know, the one that I think offers the most is the one they're trying to ship off, and that's Aaron Ramsey. And for some weird reason, they won't play him.
Because he can't run.
Yeah, but
quite simply, he can't run.
Technically, he gives them more than the others.
He's extraordinary. Like, don't get me, like, I'm going to, like, you know, state my allegiance here. I love Aaron Ramsey. I think Aaron Ramsey is an extraordinary footballer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, him coming to Serie A was like this utopian scenario for me, even though it was at Juve.
Yeah.
However, like, he can't run. He can't run. And so, especially in football today, your athletic or aerobic capacity is more important than your technical or tactical capacity. And as crap as that is, like, Aaron Ramsey is going to suffer as a consequence of that.
And then there are people saying that he could end up in the Premier League playing for Newcastle, where it's going to be
the most pace and power league possible. Aaron Ramsey with half a fork in him is going to play in the Premier League. Like, he'll get eaten alive.
In a 4-4-2 under Eddie Howe.
Yeah.
Go figure. Anyways, let's talk just quickly. We're running out of time here. Fiorentina we'll touch on very quickly, and we'll also get to Hellas Verona and Torino, also Genoa as well, because they've had a unbelievable sort of few weeks in who they've appointed as their manager. Fiorentina played Milan this weekend. Again, with Fiorentina stuttering, 1 week a win, 1 week loss. You don't know what you're going to get from the other side with them. I think they were perhaps unlucky not to beat Juve before the international break.
Yes.
They probably should have won that game. Is it still all the same with Fiorentina? Just inconsistent, not much, a little bit, one-dimensional. They show moments, but not sustained. Nothing sustained.
Yeah, like I think there's in a similar way to Milan. I think there's a lot of incompatibilities with their front three, and that can be either masked or exposed by the midfield, depending on composition. And I know, and it was particularly in the Juve game where they had I think it was, but they started with Jack Torreira and Castrovilli in midfield, and then they had Saponara, I think.
Saponara
on the left. Yeah. So I think it's a tricky one, because Callejon, even on his best day, was required a reference point. Dusan Vlahovic, you know what? I don't see it.
You don't see it?
I don't see
Curious.
it.
Give us why.
Like, he's just all right. It's hard to explain, but he's like this quintessential Balkan number 9. Like, he's all elbows. He'll run a lot. He'll give you a lot of physical duels, but like, and he's got a like this unbelievable ping on him. But how much of a trade-off is that to what he doesn't provide in possession?
So
what you're saying, the generation of chances.
So what you're saying is another Alexander Mitrovic.
No, mate, he's not necessarily a Mitrovic, but like
there's similar.
Yeah, there's a relative similarity there. I don't know, like there's a lot of hype on Vlahovic, but I just don't see it, especially, let's say, if he's to make the leap to a big club, for example. This might be his level.
I wouldn't be surprised if he actually ends up, if all those rumours about him going to Tottenham actually happen. I can see it. I can't see him playing in Serie A next season because, to be honest, I know that he's kind of out of contract and the ball's... Fiorentina's already set the precedent, but Tottenham are going to overspend, right? If Conte wants him, Conte's going to get him. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Donio
Conte will love him if he's going to be that sort of physical presence. And to be honest, you know what's funny? Conte will probably make him into a 15-goal season striker like he did with, some other sort of average sort of strike. Similar. I mean, look at Diego Costa, similar elbows kind of player. I mean,
no. You can't. Diego Costa, yes, he was an elbows player, but he could do a lot in isolation. Man.
Okay.
Having
maybe Graziano Pelle in a small sample size. Maybe.
Graziano Pelle, for example, a small sample size, but a very compatible striker to Donio Conte. But it's not. Now, this is me not saying, Dusan Vlahovic is bad in any way, but I think his player or his profile and his preferences as a player and like what he is as a footballer, I think it has a ceiling. And I'm not sure if his ceiling is any higher than what it is at the moment. He might be just mid-table Serie A excellence.
Potentially. I mean,
there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing, because mid-table Serie A excellence is great. We love that mid-table.
It's the most prestigious of all.
Yeah, he'll join Andrea Bellotti in that little that small sample size category. Just before we move on from Fiorentina, just a thought: would Fiorentina be like the team that has arguably, for outside of the big teams, the biggest? Ranked so high up the NRI standings just for the amount of names.
Huge NRI for Fiorentina. Like Pereira played in the Premier League.
Bonaventura.
Yeah.
Sofia and
At one stage, they had Callejon when Napoli were on the starting. You had the casuals who watched Napoli. Oh, Callejon's mad. So, Fiorentina are one of the let's be honest. NRI in Serie A is very low.
Yeah.
On the whole, you don't have people you don't have the punters who are going to go to the precinct or and watch the Premier League. They're not going to know who Dusan Vlahovic is, for example.
No.
They'll know who they'll know a Frank Ribery when he was at Fiorentina before he left. It's Ribery, he's mad. I remember watching him at Bayern. Fiorentina. In relative terms in Serie A, high on the NRI.
And you know what? It also exacerbates that. Just looking at so many of these Fiorentina players is you've got the FIFA crowd.
Yeah.
And they see Callejon like, oh, man, he's so fast.
He's mad. He has 99 pace.
Yeah. Oh, I had him in Ultimate Team. He's so quick. Even Mattia Nastasic or, Marco Benassi.
He was at City.
Odriozola. It's even
high NRI.
NRI. Cagliari's the same, NRI. Man.
High NRI. The thing about NRI, it doesn't mean you're good. Look at Belgium. The Belgian national team have had the highest NRI of anyone in the history of man. They've never been a serious team.
Hey, but the FIFA rankings are basically off NRI if you ask them, because they're always the number one team for some reason. I don't know if are you a tennis fan?
I'm a massive tennis fan.
It's remember when Caroline Wozniacki used to be world number one but never won anything for so long?
She was the most unserious tennis player ever.
Yeah, and she'd always be world number one but would never win anything. It's
just
that.
Not clutch, man.
Yeah. No, legit. Moving on, let's run through these teams quickly. Hellas Verona. Igor Tudor's got him playing some good football, but you've got a bit of a theory. I think some people think about the 10-game burst.
Yeah, the 10-game. It's okay. You have this magic number to see whether XG will provide an accurate forecast, and the best way to do that with respect to sample size is to use 10 games. 10 games, it's still not saying anything definitive with respect to Hellas Verona, but what is definitive is how well they've defended in comparison to how Di Francesco had them going. I think it's a more relative way of defending to when Ivan Juric was there. Mm-hmm. A lot of aggressive pressing. But he's kind of mixed between, just hard and fast man-oriented defending and, something more, let's say, structured and zonal. I think they've been very good defensively, and then as a consequence, the manner in which they can, transition helps that, or is aided by that. Sorry, but my God, like Simeone is scoring rippers. Like
I know.
I'm just shocked there. Where is this coming from?
I know. I'd kind of lost faith in Giovanni Simeone before this season because he'd always had potential, but he'd just never really taken the leap. He never had the leap, like talking on AFL terms, like he never had the big season, the champion data
the breakout year. He never had the breakout year at Fiorentina, for example.
No, and he's come here under Tudor and he's done a brilliant job. I mean, talking about defending, they do concede. They haven't had a clean sheet, I don't think, under Tudor.
No, but it's a consequence of how aggressively they defend.
Yeah, that's what I was like sort of alluding to, is that the way that they push everyone up. You once that ball cuts through and you get through that first line, you remember against Milan when they were 2-0 up, and once they conceded, it was over. Like they found themselves just open, and they can find themselves a bit brittle at times. But to be honest, like they've been fun. They've been really, really fun.
And that's not necessarily something that applies to Igor Tudor coach teams.
No, but this is an interesting month for them because they played before this period all the big teams. Now it's Empoli, Sampdoria, Cagliari, Venezia. Atalanta will be tough.
Now they need the ball.
Yes, now it'll be interesting. This is kind of the this is where we see what they're really made of. So that's probably one way to sum it up. Let's talk about Torino quickly. Like again, similar sort of stuff. Beautiful football.
Yeah.
Beautiful football. But we're speaking off there about the Spezia game. Some key players missing. They lost. They just haven't been able to get any consistency in their results.
Yeah, and consistency in results and in personnel as well. Like it was the first, and it was the end of the Juve game where they finally had something that looks like their strongest starting 11. Since then, they've had Pobega out, they had Belotti out, they had Brecalo out, and so it creates certain responsibilities for other players like a Lukic or a Dennis Pratt that they're not capable of doing. And the same goes for, let's say, Tony Sanabria as well. Like. If they are to, let's say, remain in European contention, and they're absolutely not out of it, like you think about it, they're only 4 points off at the moment, and so they need to be fit. They need to be fit in order to get a run going. Yeah. Let's say after heading into the next month,
they have a sensational squad. They have a very good squad, a very underrated squad. I think is probably the best way to put it. Pobega's had an amazing season there. I know we've been speaking a lot about Pobega today, but if you haven't watched Pobega, for those listening, go watch him. Like just if you see Torino on TV, see Tommaso Pobega playing, just watch him. He's an unbelievable player that you will see why Milan fans aren't too worried about losing Kessie if he's going to be coming back next season.
Like he's a powerhouse, but he also takes risks. Yeah. And you don't necessarily have to be this technical marvel to make certain decisions off the ball and make certain decisions on the ball. Like he's very much a midfielder, like who lives by the who dares wins philosophy. I really enjoy watching Pobega play, and Pobega and Brecalo finally playing in a position that actually suits him. Pardon my international frustrations with Dalic's use of Brecalo, but like Brecalo is everything that I thought he would be coming into Serie A. He's perfect for Serie A, and it's just a shame that he went down coming into the international break. He actually played the second game against Russia yesterday. I was frankly surprised by that, but if they can get like their strongest starting 11 out there, they can do damage in Serie A.
Yeah, I agree. Just one last one before we go, Ante. Let's talk about Andrei Shevchenko. He's back in Serie A, this time as a manager after leaving the Ukraine. Ballardini sacked before the international break. This is an unbelievable appointment. Like, for a team, like, honestly, where I expected Shevchenko to end up in Serie A, I expect him to be at a bigger club. Yeah. But to go to Genoa, this is a coup and a half.
Like, you know what? I think that's actually cool on Shevchenko's part. Like it's a gamble on Shevchenko's part because he did, he, let's say, built NRI and a reputation as Ukraine's coach. And he did a very good job there, at least in my opinion. I think he has the players who are compatible to be able to play in the way he wants. I'm not sure, let's say, However, the only isolated example, I think, is a Pablo Galdames, who is very good offensively, but not necessarily a player who can cover a lot of aspects for Shevchenko. And that was always what he wanted with midfield. And I think that's why he kind of moved away with Malinovsky, in midfield as a for the Ukraine team. And that's why he kind of went towards Shaparenko. I'm really intrigued to see how he sets that midfield up, like going forward. And I think it'll really determine whether Genoa stay up.
Yeah. I mean, they're probably going to play a 4-3-3. You think? Bardelli as a 6, they'll throw players in around them, but
safe pair of hands. Even at this level, like Bardelli as a 6 in Serie A. Like let's say in the Bundesliga, EPL, he'd get eaten alive, but in Serie A, like he's smart enough to make it work. But the players around him will be the interesting one.
Well, they've got Roma this weekend, and if you're going to send a statement,
new coach dance against Roma.
You win at the Massari against Roma. I tell you what, I genuinely wouldn't be surprised on Monday morning if they come away with a win, but it's a good win.
I think it's like I'm not sure if we should be giving betting recommendations, but I think that's the Roma plus, not Roma. I think that's the Genoa plus 0.5.
Yeah, no, honestly though, I think if you're watching any Serie A game this weekend, there's some big ones. But this is one, obviously, just to keep on the back burner. If you're up and it's a 6:45 time slot on a Monday, keep that one in the back of your mind. Ante, before we go, what are some of the sort of things you're looking forward to in the next month? Obviously, there's a lot happening at either end of the table, but what's sort of the storyline you're looking forward to?
Outside of the lead into Milan Napoli before Christmas, Roma, Mourinho, and how that whether it really kind of which way it goes essentially, and also I'm really intrigued to see Inter if they can stay in touch.
Yeah. No.
I
think that's the big one. I think that's the big one. Like the Inter one is massive.
That's the story. Like if like as long as Milan and Napoli stay where they are, if Inter can remain within touching distance at this point coming into AFCON, I think this is huge for the season.
Yeah, I think for me, my eyes will definitely be on the Napoli Inter game this weekend. It's a shame it's the 4:00 kickoff and not the 6:45.
Yeah, it's the worst.
And even Lazio Juve is a big game this weekend. But I think for me, I'm just can't wait to see who slips first between Milan and Napoli. I'm curious to see who blinks first. And just to see how things go,
Sorry. And that was actually one of the interesting things about the Napoli-Hellas game, where Napoli probably did enough to win. Like, they created chances well enough. And I remember I was talking in the last episode, it's like, you didn't necessarily trust Napoli.
No.
Over the years, they played well, and this is an important month for Napoli.
Yeah, I think I think equally for Milan as well, because even though they're basically out of the Champions League, they're not going to lie down against Atleti and Liverpool. And to be honest, if they've got a chance, Pioli's going to put out a winning team. But I look at the games either side of them, games against Sassuolo at home, and Sassuolo's always been Milan's bogey team. I look at, away at Udinese, we know what happens when you go to Udine, and we know what Luca Gotti's going to do. That's also a banana skin heading into the Napoli game. And even got to play Genoa away. Going up against Andrei Shevchenko, we don't know what to expect. And even to a lesser extent, Fiorentina this weekend at the Atermio Franchi. That in itself is going to be an interesting watch, because the other part of this is they've still got players out. Is Tatarusanu going to be able to keep things going between the sticks? Calabria is now out for at least a week or two, so a good chance for Kalulu. But at the same time, you lose that bit of intangibles because Calabria is a leader down there. And how does Pioli manage his squad during this period? Does he stick with Zlatan as the main man? Does he go with Rebic as the main man? It's going to be an interesting month for Milan, and I think it's when it all culminates that day on that game on the 20th of December at the San Siro. I am very curious to see where both teams are at. If both these teams go through without a blemish and they win all these games or don't drop a point, or if they just match records, that is going to be massive. Just to make it so clear.
Man.
That is going to be huge. Like that is, if there was ever a grand final in the Serie A, this is the grand final. Like this is it.
This is one of the biggest games of the domestic or like the club calendar
in
across Europe. Yeah, this is massive this season. I can't wait for and it's like Christmas will come 5 days early.
Yeah.
Like I really can't wait for this game, and like in a similar way that the game in November last season was between the two sides. High drama, great football, a lot on the line, two informed teams. Like, I think that's an amplification of what we saw in that first game last season, which was arguably one of the best games of the whole season, overall. Like if they maintain in form both sides, what a game. I can't wait.
It's a real shame that the break ends after another game. They have to play one more game before the break. It'd be perfect if that was just like the culmination. It's like you remember how always in Game of Thrones they used to have always the biggest episode as the second last episode of the season.
Last episode.
And it was like you have the finale, but it's like this doesn't feel right. Like it could have just ended there. It's like they jumped the shark. So it'd be good if they just went, you know what? Stuff Milan Empoli. Let's throw that. Let's go on to Theodore 3 days early. Like, who cares, So, anyways, Ante, it's been a pleasure, man. Great chatting. If you've missed any of the show, guys, you want to listen back later, feel free to check out our podcast platforms on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get them. We'll be back hopefully in around a month, maybe around the Christmas period. We'll see how we go. But for myself, Nick DeBone and Ante Jukic, we say goodbye for now.
Ciao.
Looking to change your destiny in life? Be your own boss? Start your own business?
All right, brother.
If you are, you need people who understand your needs and are committed to helping you make it happen. At DKP & Co Chartered Accountants, we are more than just accountants. We are business advisors, taxation consultants, and strategists that specialise in